Human trafficking is a largely unseen criminal activity in our community. The criminal groups who operate locally and internationally would like to keep it that way. On this edition, we'll learn how we can battle human trafficking in our area.
Well, I don't have nothing younger than 14.
Okay, no, 14 is good.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, you're going to have to add something to that.
Sure.
What you willing to add to that, too? Just talk to me.
Well, like I said, this is my first time out.
You know, now you...
So the girls over there cost $2, is it?
That's the women.
The women.
Now, if I told you 2, and you know you want something younger, and I tell you just to add something to it, just tell me, you just pick a figure to that.
Well, I guess, what, 3?
3. If you do 3, you got it.
Human trafficking has been described in many ways, whether it's modern-day slavery, exploitation of individuals. Essentially what it is when you have a person who takes advantage of certain vulnerabilities that exist in another human being, they exploit those vulnerabilities for profit, and that profit can be through sex trafficking, typically what we think of as prostitution or other things that occur in the commercial sex industry, or labor trafficking. Oftentimes we see that in this area through domestic servitude, as well as within some of our commercial establishments.
So there is no profile of what a victim looks like. It really can hit across all different socioeconomic statuses, classes, races, genders. You know, one of the most overlooked victims is often the male victims, but it really can range in terms of what a victim looks like. So teen sex trafficking is actually, it's a national and even an international issue. In the U.S., it really hits across all different states. So it's not something that's just targeted in more populated areas or populated cities such as Chicago or New York. In Northern Virginia, it's actually a huge issue. In Northern Virginia, we've actually prosecuted the most sex trafficking cases as it relates to gang control dynamics. So that just speaks to a lot of the issues that are happening in our area. It really has been an increasing issues and a movement that the schools, public services, treatment providers are now moving towards, because it really hits all facets of demographics in terms of ages, races, and genders.
The Fairfax County Police Department has responded as aggressively as they possibly can. So one of the main things that we did is, in conjunction with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia and Polaris Project, applied for what's called an Enhanced Collaborative Model Grant to form a human trafficking task force. We were awarded that grant, and we started in October 2013, the first human trafficking unit. So that pays for a full-time detective and crime analyst to really address the issues and track what is going on with human trafficking here in Northern Virginia.
Majority of the times the risk factors for victims really goes to vulnerabilities. It really goes to mental health issues. Self-esteem is a huge component to one's vulnerability. Lacking a clear understanding of oneself, that also contributes to it. Another vulnerability also goes down to social supports and support networks. An individual that lacks some support network is more susceptible to engaging in a negative behavior or susceptible to victimization.
We're all under 18. We're all the same age. There would be a few girls that I knew that were like in their 20s or whatever, but they had been doing it since they were our age anyways. I did wait till 12, and these girls were doing it since they were like 8 or 9. And now they're like 23.
Nationwide, sex trafficking victims are recruited as young as the average age of induction is 13 or 14. Fairfax County, it tends to be about 15 or 16, but people can be induced very young. And so the traffickers can really vary in terms of what they look like, what they do, but the general pattern that they follow is that they will use deception to lure a teen into trusting them, talking about teen sex trafficking especially, and then they will exploit that trust by increasingly controlling, coercing, and manipulating the teen into engaging in commercial sex for the traffickers' financial gain.
And so in an effort to raise awareness, one of the things that the police department's done is, in conjunction with multiple other agencies throughout the county, to include the schools, the Office for Women and Domestic Violence, as well as other community advocates, has developed a public awareness campaign. And the name of that public awareness campaign is Just Ask. The idea behind it is to get people in the community to just start asking questions.
The Just Ask Prevention Project has really two parts to it. One of those parts is to train professionals and others to be part of that community response. Today we're doing one of those trainings. It's focused on counselors, and we'll be offering other trainings to other groups around human trafficking. The other side of it is to educate the public. We're hoping that we can both educate the public to recognize human trafficking, to spot it, and then also as we're recovering more victims, which is happening, we're also prepared to offer them services and to respond to them as a community.
Sometimes it's the families that trafficked, you know, my survivor, or they blamed it on them, or they denied it, or they minimized it, and that pain is so significant. Families need a lot of help dealing with this. The attendees of the training are clinicians who work with complex trauma, abuse, domestic violence, or human trafficking. And so this is about empowering clinicians, giving them the very best we have so that they can feel confident when they have a trafficking survivor come to them, or an organization that approaches them and say we need therapeutic intervention, so that they kind of have just a roadmap to go on and what is best practices and evidence-based practices for the many, many faceted issues that trafficking survivors face.
Lucky Lynn had beat the crap out of me because I didn't bring enough how much he wanted. I brought home I think like $800, and he said he wanted at least 5 more.
We talk about individuals that are drawn into sex trafficking, which tends to be the more predominant issue here in Northern Virginia. We have individuals who come from very wealthy neighborhoods, very wealthy homes, and we also have individuals that come from very low socioeconomic classes. Economics, the need for money, is sometimes a motivating factor, which draws the victims into this type of lifestyle. But most commonly, particularly among our teen population, which tends to be the most vulnerable for this type of conduct, we see them being drawn in with the lures of self-worth, identity, building of self-esteem. The traffickers offer them love and friendship and other things that they desire. So that's really what kind of draws them to this lifestyle.
When it comes to the warning signs of this crime, sex trafficking, what it entails is it can be an individual that doesn't show any signs at all. Again, and that relates back to being no profile, or an individual just not changing anything in their routine. For parents or for outsiders looking at someone, I would say the biggest thing I would look out for is some type of dramatic change. Now that could be change emotionally, a change in someone's personality, or change in someone's social group, all of a sudden changing friends or not hanging out with friends. Excessive use on the media websites, that's a huge risk factor, and it's also something that parents should be aware of. Changes in clothing, attire, piercings, markings, anything, those are the warning signs that I would look at.
Police are trying to stamp it out now very much. So now it's more through the internet, especially for child rings. Even when I go out and I'm hunting, I'm looking, I'm a predator. They prey on the innocent.
So essentially what we've learned about the traffickers is that they conduct their operations when they're drawing somebody into this lifestyle, inducing them into commercial sex, if you will, through 3 stages. The first is scouting. Commonly we would refer to that as recruiting, where they're going out, whether it's through social media or whether they're going out in person, and they're looking for potential targets. We're finding that they're not only doing it on social media, they're also doing it in other locations like malls or social hangouts for our teenagers, where they have an opportunity to observe the teenagers to determine whether or not they have a great deal of self-esteem or whether they may be lacking with self-esteem. And that's one of the most important things that a teen should be aware of, is that individuals out there are able to size them up based on the way that they carry themselves, the way that they interact with others. And so those that appear to have low self-esteem are often targeted during this scouting phase. And then we have the manipulation phase, or sometimes we refer to it as a grooming phase, where They start to befriend these individuals. Maybe they do it through what's sometimes called a lover boy syndrome, where they will date them and say, hey, I'm your boyfriend, and have these individuals fall in love with them, offer them all the things that they're really not getting elsewhere in their lives. So these girls have this connection to them, and then they convince them, they manipulate them into engaging into commercial sex. Most often they're not approaching it from the perspective of, hey, you know, you're going to engage in prostitution. It's more of, hey, I need you to do this favor for me, or you know, I'm really down on my luck, I don't have any money, we need money for whatever particular reason, can you just do this one time, type of thing. But once they have them do it one time, now they're trapped, and that's essentially the third phase, is the trapping phase. How do we maintain control over these individuals? Because really that's what human trafficking is about. It's about maintaining control over another human being and exploiting them for profit.
The ramifications of this kind of trauma are great. It doesn't go away with time, it doesn't get better on its own. And so if you know someone who has had this experience, getting them good professional help is important, and then having a family and a social environment that's supportive is so important. So I think having that healthy balance of care and support and good professional help and a community surrounding, and at the same time honoring how this person has survived. Things that are unimaginable for most of us, and celebrating the fact that they have survived. And I think a balance of those two things is the best approach, and what most survivors need from us.
Human trafficking is not something that we in law enforcement can solve on our own. It's not something that social services or CPS or the courts or anybody else can solve on their own. It really requires a collaborative effort. So I encourage individuals to educate themselves about what human trafficking really is and what it looks like. I encourage them to get involved through the Northern Virginia Human Trafficking Task Force or through the Northern Virginia Human Trafficking Initiative, or through whatever organization they come across that might be able to help raise awareness as well as provide services for these victims.